Up next is Anna Noon from the Groundswell Collective, and she's going to talk to us about creating urban wildlife oases with tiny forests.
Hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me along today to talk to you about tiny forests and the role they play in supporting biodiversity and particularly pollinators. My name's Anna, and I've been leading a tiny forest movement here in my hometown of Lake Macquarie in conjunction with two not-for-profit community organisations, the Groundswell Collective and ReLeaf Lake Mac, both of whom are dedicated to building collaborative partnerships to support and increase local tree canopy, habitat and community resilience. I'd firstly like to acknowledge that I'm recording this from the traditional lands of the Awabakal people, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect and warm welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members listening in today. Before I launch into what tiny forests are, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background of how I got into this. So back in 2019, my family and I moved onto a small acreage on the outskirts of Lake Macquarie. I'd grown up on a sheep and cattle property in the New England when I was young and was always keen to get back on the land. And what you're looking at here is when we purchased our property in October of 2019, it looked like that photo on the left. It was lovely and lush and green. And by the time the property settled and we moved in, it looked a little bit more like that photo on the right, which was December of 2019. And from there, it continued to get much drier and much hotter. And we spent our first summer surrounded by bushfires, making emergency plans and running very low on water, which was a real baptism by fire for my children of life on the land. And then you will all recall, as vividly as I do, I'm sure, following the fires came COVID and this whole time of kind of rethinking for lots of people. Between the move and those few events, it really prompted a personal journey for my family and I about living more sustainably. We started with really small efforts, and I've included some pictures there of things like worm farming and composting and growing our own veggies. And I also joined a number of community groups to do more out in the community. Now, during that time, I was also doing some tertiary academic studies into sustainable living. And part of what my studies included was getting us to look at local solutions to really large wicked issues. So those complex and difficult to solve problems that exist in our local environment, but also globally. And it was at that time I really started to deep dive into biodiversity loss and learn a lot more about how human activity is leading to mass species extinction, how we're upsetting the balance of nature and making our ecosystems fragile and less resistant to disruptions. I learned a lot about how biodiversity and nature is critical to our survival, obviously providing the air we breathe, pollination for our crops and giving us the food, fibre and fodders we rely on. And I learned a lot about how we urgently need to transform and make big changes to restore and protect biodiversity across both our local environment and more broadly globally. From a local perspective here where I am in Lake Mac, we're like lots of coastal urban areas. We face the intertwined challenges of climate change and accelerated population growth. Our population of 205,000 is set to grow by another 25,000 people over the next 13 years, which will create an increased demand for housing. And obviously, as the number of people living and working in our city increases, so does the risk to urban nature. We really need to plan to take proactive measures around the lack of urban green spaces, which is resulting in fewer habitats for wildlife and the amplifications of climate change, such as flooding, pollution and heat stress. So I was deeply thinking about these issues, doing a number of different things to try to address that both at home and out in the community. And I'm sure, as you will know and are all too familiar with, then more recently we had the outbreak of Varroa, which posed this increasing risk for pollinated services and biodiversity support locally. So what I did is I went off and I did some kind of deep dive into academic literature around international studies of projects people have undertaken that had really good evidence at base around biodiversity support and pollinator support. I also went out and spoke to a number of our existing greening groups about what they'd like to see if we were to run some community projects that would look at increasing green space in urban areas and biodiversity support. And these were some of the things they came out and said. They wanted projects that inspired hope, that provided education to people who may not have a deep understanding of the importance of these projects, something that was more than just planting trees, but was leaving a legacy behind. And that's when I came across what's called a tiny forest. I'm just going to bring up a video for you here. Just hang on a sec. I'll just share my screen across because I think this video says it better than I can. So what I learnt about tiny forests was that they were this densely packed patch of native bushland planted using organic soil remediation in an area about the size of a tennis court. And there are examples of these all around the world. There was lots in Europe, they had started in Japan, they had been expanded into India, they'd gone through Taiwan, and a whole world, a range of different global areas that had adopted this method given the evidence around them. So they were this international movement with over 3,500 tiny forests, both worldwide, and they were in both urban areas and in rural areas. And as that little video pointed out, they were developed by a Japanese botanist in the 1970s who was a specialist in studying restoring natural vegetation on degraded land, and his name was Aokira Miyawaki. And he looked at ancient forests surrounding Shinto temples in Japan and developed this theory and method to accelerate forest growth and mimic a mature forest. Now this slide has quite a lot of details on it, but what you can see on the left is kind of a traditional way of a climax forest developing over time. So you take the climate, the topography, and the soil, and that influences what happens. If humans impact along the way and bare land is there, then it will take up to 200 years. You can see down this side, it'll take up to 200 years to reach this final ecosystem. And what Alkira Mirawaki decided was he could expedite that process by adding organic material to the soil and densely planting forest trees from this climax variety that would appear there naturally at this point, and he could create the same result within about 20 years. Now this slide shows you a similar process just in a different way. So if you have a piece of degraded land, whether it's been burnt by traditional methods or bushfire, or if we clear it and we let it naturally regenerate, it will go through these stages. First you'll have your pioneer plants, and then your grasses, your shrubs, our short-lived trees like our acacias that often come in first, grow quickly, die quickly, and then over time you'll get to this point where you have a climax forest. So what Alkira decided was he could improve the soil, plant these species, and they would grow rapidly, saving all those years and time in regeneration. And what they found from studying these tiny forests was that they were 100 times more biodiverse than the existing land that had been there before. So if it was grassland, they were 30 times denser than monoculture plantings, and they grew 10 times faster than traditional planting methods. So with that in mind, I set about developing a pilot project here in the Hunter, which was called the Lake Mac Tiny Forest. And it had this vision. It was a vision to be an innovative, community-led solution which aimed to support local biodiversity, protect and enhance our environment. It was based on that research from global examples about the benefits to both social and environmental benefits to the community, and it would be part of this worldwide movement that helps support biodiversity, trap stormwater, and assist with combating climate change. So it took about 2.5 years to get the approvals in the piece of land. So we had a piece of public land that council donated to us, but we then set about undertaking the steps required to build a tiny forest. So we did detailed soil studies, we loosened the earth and added organic materials like compost and manure. We fitted, you can see there, we fitted some timber trunks around the outside to provide some weed protection, and then installed an outdoor learning classroom there for people to come and visit the forest. And then we had 60 students from Teralba Public School come and help us plant some of the trees, and 70 community members that came along, and in a small patch here of 340 square metres, so a little bit bigger than a tennis court that you can see here, we planted 750 canopy trees. We also have our second project under development now that's called the Urban Hum Tiny Forest, and this is going to be planted at the end of October. And this project is a direct response to the varroa mite outbreak. The land that we are using is a private block that belongs to a previous apiarist who had 110 hives euthanized during the varroa response, and they're now turning a portion of their property into an urban oasis for native pollinators. One of the really exciting things about tiny forests is, along with the program, we have volunteer tree keepers who offer up their skills and services to maintain the site for 2 years. And after 2 years, those tiny forests are self-suppressing, so the weeds suppress naturally as the canopy grows, so they don't require any human intervention after 2 years. And we undertake citizen science studies alongside of it. So we look at the benefits to thermal comfort. So obviously having a patch of trees helps to reduce urban temperatures. So we look at the thermal comfort differences inside the forest and outside the forest. We look at the impacts for positive impacts for flood mitigation, how water is stored through the soil given its improved health. We study the biodiversity, looking particularly at pollinators that are attracted to the site, as well as soil dwellers. And we do these studies every 6 months to see the improvements over time. We also measure carbon absorption, and we do some studies around social and health improvements from being part of the program. So tiny forests are more than just plants and animals. They're about providing a place for people to connect. They provide inspiration and hope about nature-based solutions to climate change, things people can do to support biodiversity, and these little patches of dense habitat have been proven to provide really significant support to biodiversity. We undertake education and information sharing. We often do tours and talks about tiny forests. We invite school groups and any groups along to come and learn about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We build partnerships and collaboration between the community and local businesses, and everybody kind of pitches in to help out. And they're a really great example of grassroots actions that can be taken to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Now, I think that's my time up. So if anyone is interested in learning more, you're welcome to jump on our website at thegroundswell.org, or you can email me at anna@thegroundswell.org.au. And if you have a little patch of land that you think might be suitable for a tiny forest, we would absolutely love to hear from you.